Hello, welcome to us, Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is a tier list for maybe one of the most popular factions in Age of Sigmar and maybe one of the most popular Warhammer factions to ever have existed. Dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, dinosaurs with laser beams, dinosaurs with mind bullets. Arguably one of the most evocative armies that you can get to play. And it's a cool roster. There's lots of things you can do with this army, and I'm going to break it all down in a tier list. Now, if you want, you can go back and look at the review that I did for the battle pack that came out at the start of Age of Sigmar 4. Most of this is pretty much on the money and similar to what I'm going to say. There's going to be one big inclusion, just spoilers, it's going to be about Kroak. But I think there's some really cool stuff inside of this army, multiple ways to play. Do I think that they're necessarily the very best army in the game? At the moment of recording, which is February 2020, then I forgot what year it was, then maybe they are pretty much around the 3-2 to 5-0 category, the occasional 5-0, but that's normally centered around Kroak. Okay, let's get straight into it and start looking at the units. I think it's also worth talking about the fact that you've got a lot of really good things in this army when it comes to options. You don't necessarily have like a really big, impactful missile unit. With the exception of that, you've got many combat units. You've got some really good support units. You've got good, excellent magical support. So it's a really interesting army to build around, but maybe not quite as diverse as some of the other armies, but the internal balance is much better than you'll find in something like Slaves to Darkness. Let's quickly talk about the tiers and the way that we work this. So obviously, when we do talk about this, I'm going to talk about the points, but in some cases, some units can become even better. Some units are very effective, but maybe they're just too expensive. So if the points came down on that unit, they would be more effective, but mainly the effectiveness of a unit is based upon what its abilities have access to in its war scrolls. Everything in Age of Sigmar has a chassis, right? It's got a number of health, it's got the ability to move a certain distance, it's got a save characteristic, it's got a control value. So the chassis, and then it's got like a weapon profile. Those chassis that, like, if you can kind of think of it that way, mean that you just add on special abilities wherever you can go. And then that's normally what I'm looking for. Special abilities normally make things far more effective, like Fight Twice is obviously an incredibly good ability. The ability to reduce down people's charges, which we're going to see in here. A bunch of fun stuff are going to make things more effective. So when you are list building, or if you're going to start collecting an Age of Sigmar army, a Seraphon army, then you probably want to start looking at the most effective units, but sometimes building a whole cohesive list from this army would mean that you would probably not necessarily take all of the most effective units, and you might take little bits of them to build a more functional army. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's being brought up, why is red most effective? It's like a spice chart. Yeah, more spicy is red, down to green, which is where I eat. I'm a green level eater, but my takes are always red hot. We're going to start big, and we're going to go with like the faction leader, Lord Kroak. So unique character, you can only have one of him. He's a 3-cast wizard with a 4-up save, a 4-up ward save, and unless you do a certain amount of damage plus a very good dice roll, he's going to heal all of that damage back. So chip damage doesn't work particularly well on Kroak. Now, the main reason Kroak is so effective, I mean, that makes him so effective already, right? He's very survivable from a bunch of different sources, chip damage being like one of those main sources of like slowly whittling a unit down. But the main reason you're going to bring Kroak is because he is an amazing damage dealer and got amazing threat projection. He's a level 3 wizard with +2 to cast and +1 to unbind, and is able to unbind anywhere on the board. So not only is he good for your army and their ability to do stuff, it's good counterpiece against enemy wizards, which is excellent. Also, you can extend the range and threat projection of one of those spells by casting a spell through a skink wizard that's wholly within 18 inches, which is amazing. And he's also got an incredible spell, which is really the point, because his 7 to cast spell, which obviously with +2 to cast becomes a 5, I really feel like they forgot that, means that he's going to be casting this very reliably. And what you do is you pick 3 visible enemy units within 18 inches, and they take D3 mortal damage each. Now, it's the good D3 mortal damage, where it's not a 2+ D3 mortals. You can do 1 mortal damage, 2 or 3 mortal damage. Super nice. Okay, very good. And you can cast this spell multiple times. So you cast this spell 3 different times. which means you could be potentially doing 9d3 mortal damage, cast it in your opponent's turn, even with -1 from magical intervention. You're still getting +2. So that means that you're going to be casting at +1, and that means another potential 3d3 mortal damage. It's fair to say that since we got the Battle Scroll update and Kroak has had an uptick in its quality because some of his stuff changed, this guy has gone from way too expensive, just crazy amounts of stuff. So yeah, just very, very good, very effective. Now, obviously, it could become too expensive if the points don't allow for it. Also needs to be protected. So you probably going to, when we talk about Saurus Guard or just regular Saurus, you probably also want to maybe try and protect Kroak. You need screens, you need stuff to keep Kroak from being killed. And there are some major threats out there that can kill the big old frog, to be honest. But the output is great. The magical support is great. The ability to put manifestations on the board and be a 3-cast. So it's incredible stuff. Very, very effective. Probably, if you just make it more expensive, it can drop a level and stuff. But yeah, great. Next up, we're obviously going to talk about the terrain feature that you get for Seraphon, the Realmshaper engine. And I want to talk about Kroak first so that we could talk about the win condition for how Kroak works. Does a bunch of chip damage, mortal damage at range, and then the Realmshaper engine helps with this. Now, there's also another way to think of the Realmshaper engine, but let's first look at its Power Unleashed ability, where if you've got a friendly Seraphon wizard within 3 inches, you can pick an enemy, well, you can pick a terrain feature within 24 inches. It's only within 24, not wholly within 24, which is most of the board. Then every enemy unit within 3 inches of that, up to 3 enemy units within 3 inches of that it has a bad D3 mortal damage attack, so 2 plus D3 mortal damage. So potentially you could be doing another, a bunch of mortal damage into those units you've just hit with Kroak. So that's obviously really good. 15 health 4-up save. It is a big terrain feature, which, because it's got cover and unstable, you can use to your advantage, which is really beneficial. And it's got a passive called Fierce Guardians. Now, this is slightly different, and I think maybe you would start playing around with this if you were running a slightly different build to if you were playing with Kroak. You add 1 to hit rolls for combat attacks made by friendly Saurus or Kroxigor units that target an enemy unit, while that enemy unit is within 9 inches of this terrain feature. So when we start talking about a Slann, which we'll talk about in a moment, you're going to want to keep the Slann alive because he brings models back from the dead. So being able to have a unit that stood around the Slann that's going to get naturally +1 to hit isn't a massive bonus, but it is something to think about because you don't really want the Slann to be on the front lines because it's kind of exactly like how Gloomspite Gits have their Loon Shrine bring units back as well. You just got to pay points for it. It's a nice upgrade as well. And I think realistically, you're either playing Slann or you're playing Kroak. So it's nice that this affects both of them. And even if you're not playing either, which we have seen lists that do that, being able to do chip mortal damage in each one of your hero phases, realistically, if this thing stays alive for 5 turns, you could be potentially doing 5 lots of mortal AoE damage to the enemy army, which is crazy good. So yeah, excellent piece. And obviously it's going to go into most effective. It's the most effective piece you've got. Is it the strongest faction terrain in the game? Probably not, but it's very good. Next up, we're going to look at the Slann Starmaster. So Slann and Kroak are probably 2 units that you change, and then you build your list kind of around the concept of having one or the other, or maybe neither. But Slann is also a 3-cast wizard, but has only got +1 to cast. Doesn't have his own unique spell lore, but does have a 5-up save and a 6-up ward save. So survivability is a major issue in comparison to Kroak, but is a much, much cheaper wizard. The reason you are bringing this pretty potent wizard as well, 3 plus to cast, +1 to 3 casts at +1 to cast, and being able to unbind anywhere on the board in the same way as Kroak, and still got the ability to cast a spell through a Skink wizard. The reason probably you bring in a Slann is because of the Celestial Reinforcements ability, where once per turn in your army, in your hero phase, you can pick a friendly Seraphon unit that's got 3 or more models, and then roll dice on a 4-up. You set up that replacement unit with half the number of models from the target unit rounding up. Hold within 12 inches this unit more than 9 inches from the enemy. So this is your kind of issue. Oh, sorry, you do have a unique spell, Celestial Equilibrium. For the rest of the turn, add 1 to casting rolls made for Seraphon wizards. But you don't normally have like multi-wizards, but you could maybe take both and get if Kroak like another +1 to cast, so he's got +3 to cast, which would be pretty funny. The reason you're bringing him is the recursion, but there's two probably major reasons that the Slann Starmaster isn't quite as effective as you necessarily would want him to be. Number one, that 5-up ward save is pretty yikesy. He is, thanks to his health pool, going to be able to be ignore missile attacks outside of 12 inches thanks to guarded hero, as long as you're within 3 inches of one of your units. And even if they go within 12 inches, still be -1 to hit. But it's fair to say, if anything gets into him, he's probably going to die. And that 6-up ward save, which you can help with, and we'll talk about that in a bit, just not as survivable as you would really want him to be. And then in addition, and I don't think if you talk to Seraphon players, or if you are a Seraphon player, let me know in the comments below, I reckon you would probably be happy playing a few more points for having a more survivable Slann. However, that recursion, being able to bring a unit back from the dead, is also unreliable because of that 4+. So it's not happening all the time. So you might say, right, I'm going to have a Slann, I'm going to have 6 Kroxigor, I'm going to send the 6 Kroxigor in. They're going to die, and then I'm going to get 3 Kroxigor back. But you might not. It's a 4+. So, and that might happen a lot of times. So this win path, or win con really, which is what you see also for Sylvaneth as an example, and some other armies. But in other armies, you just play a command point. In this, it's unreliable that you're going to get them back. And I think ultimately that means the Slann is going to just go into like effective, because while what he can potentially do is excellent, I think ultimately the fact that there are enough negatives that are in there, you could get you can get a more effective war scroll even if it costs more points. 3 cast is great. Putting manifestation on the board, absolutely excellent for your army, very, very good. But you are now going to be spending either additional points in, Saurus Guard, or you're going to be doing a lot of board control to try to protect your recursion, and your recursion is unreliable. So just effective. Just been brought up in the chat by Pershaw, so I think it's worth mentioning that where I've put the Slann versus where I've put Kroak. Obviously, if Kroak was less effective again, then you would see everyone auto return to just using the Slann. But this doesn't mean that the Slann, maybe inside of his own book, is most effective, but it doesn't mean the Slann is as effective as it could be as a war scroll. Like ultimately, if it was cheaper, or it was more effective, like a better armor save, ward save, etc., or you didn't have to spend as much points, or the recursion was better, then I think it would be higher. But ultimately, it just doesn't have those abilities, which I think is disappointing. And that's why Kroak, and you've seen the hard pivot to what Kroak does, because the recursion for Seraphon isn't necessarily intrinsic to their playstyle. They've got big combat blocks in Kroxigor and Aggradon Lancers. They've got good board presence from the Hunters and the Raptadon Chargers, and even Ripperdactyls and stuff like that. So they have real options on the tabletop that aren't really based on them sending something in, it dying, and bringing 3 of it back. Maybe like you would see with, I'm trying to think of an example, probably as you would see with Sylvaneth. So I'm going to put in effective, and I think that's a really fair choice. But obviously, feel free to in the comments below to let me know. Okay, next up, we're going to look at a couple of the hammer units that you can get. Already a hot debate as recording this with the chat. Because you've got a bunch of, you've got 2 big Kroxigor and warp spawned units. They're both Kroxigor units. One's warp spawned, one's not. Let's look at the difference. These come as a unit of 3 models and reinforceable up to unit 6. They've got 6 health, 4-up save, control value 2. They move 5 inches. Now, the Kroxigor warp spawned has got its Drake Fang Warpick, which is 4 attacks, and the Starfang Warpick, only 1 out of every 3 models can replace their Drake Fang Warpick. Now, shout out to Terry in the chat, who's talking about the fact that if you do have a reinforced unit of 6 Kroxigor, because 1 in 3 models can replace their Drake Fang Warpick with Starfang Warpick, when you start to remove models, let's say you take a ton of damage and you kill 4 Kroxigor out of the 6, it still means you can maintain your 2 special weapons in that unit, which account for more of the damage that unit can normally do. So you get a disproportionate amount of damage out of those 2 models versus the other 4 models. So actually, you've got kind of some ablative wounds on your big hitting pieces in the unit, which is kind of cool. It's quite an expensive unit. I think they're like 220, 210 or something at the time of recording. But you can get a lot of damage out of it. There's a lot of like health here as well. You've got 18 or 36 health with a 4-up save. Yeah, 220 for these guys specifically. Now, the differences between the 2 are the passives. So for the Kroxigor warp spawned, you can subtract 1 from the Ren characteristic of range weapons used for shooting attacks that target this unit. Now that's a situational bonus because your enemy might not have any shooting. On the other side, you got the Spawn of Sotek. You add 1 to the damage characteristic of this unit's melee weapons while this unit is wholly within 12 inches of any friendly Skink infantry or Skink cavalry in this combat. Now that +1 to damage is actually pretty nice because it's a +1 to damage that you can create. Like you can bring Skink infantry or Skink cavalry with your army, make it so that they're nearby, and you can start to have +1 damage to your melee weapons. Now that's really difficult to create, but it's fun because there's obviously some skill expression available to you there. On the other side of it, Kroxigor, same health and save characteristic, have got 1 passive called Brutal Blows, where the add 1 to the damage characteristic of this unit's melee weapons for attacks that target enemy unit that has 10 or more models. Now, in that situation, you need the enemy to have 10 or more models, and you don't get a second passive. Then these guys are 10 points cheaper. But the same situation also applies to their special weapons. You've got 1 in 3 special weapons, which means you're going to have 2 in 6 special weapons. So lose 4 of them, still keep your good special weapon. These guys are also anti-infantry. And again, is there lots of infantry in the game? Yes and no, depending on the matchup. And the other guys are anti-monster. So I think it would be fair to say that they are basically the same, depending on the matchups. I got to say, though, it feels like the warp spawned, so that's the ones that get the additional +1 damage, means that you've got to work. You can use some skill expression to potentially improve them, and so I'd probably have it so the warp spawned is just a little bit better than the regular Kroxigors. But honestly, I'm splitting hairs, and this could easily be somewhere else. Also, I'm a little bit conscious right now. They're putting stuff into most effective, and the hammers that you have here, like you've also got Aggradon Lancers, which we're going to talk about, Saurus Warriors as well, Saurus Guards. There's a good opportunity to have a lot of damage potential in this army. And really, we got to ask ourselves for Seraphon, is their win condition doing damage? Like, as an example, with Kragnos and Stonehorns, most of their win condition is about smashing everything in the enemy army. It's a good example of their win condition. Whereas some other armies, their win condition is very different. It's being evasive, or it's just standing on circles, whatever it might be, or it's pinning the enemy army in. These guys aren't fast enough to pin the enemy army in, so they're not going to be doing that job. So is damage really the win con for the list that you're building for Seraphon? It's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think there's some good points that maybe that is correct. These guys can do some big damage. So we've got to ask ourselves that as we go through the video. Our next unit is a Bastiladon with the Ark of Sotek. It's got 12 health, 2 up save. 2 up save, control value 5. Now, the Bastiladon Ark of Sotek is really, really functional inside the Kroak version of maybe how you would play Seraphon, because it adds to the additional mortal chip damage that you're doing already. So in combat, it's got 3 attacks that do D3 damage, but it's also got the Ark of Sotek, which is 20 attacks, but does have crit mortals. So potentially 3 times D3 damage, but also another 3 mortals from the Ark of Sotek. But the real reason it's super spicy, I mean, you roll 20 dice, you roll 5 or 6 crit mortals, you're going to really start to worry a particular unit. And also that 2 up save is super nice. Very survivable thanks to the 2 up save. All our defenses are 1 up save, ignoring round 1, really tough to push through. Now, with the Ark of Sotek, which is once per turn across the army, but it does mean it's in any combat phase, which means every combat phase. You pick up to 3 different enemy units within 9 inches, roll a d3 for each target. On a 2+, inflicts an amount of mortal damage on the target. So that's an additional potential 3d3 mortals on top of the Realmshaper's 3d3 mortals and the 9d3 mortals that we can maybe get from Kroak. But even if you're not running the Kroak version of the build, this thing's 230 points. This is a tank. It's got control value 5. It can sit on an objective. Your opponent, in some cases, is going to be a little concerned about going into it, because if it survives, it's going to be rolling a lot of attacks with its Ark of Sotek. It's going to be doing some mortals. It could potentially do quite a lot, which is really nice. If your opponent doesn't have much rend, then we're having a great time. So I'm going to put this into most effective as well. I think this is very, very good for an army. It doesn't necessarily synergize. Maybe I should bring it down a level and just say it doesn't necessarily. I don't think it does synergize. And in fact, actually, based on that, I'm also going to bring down the Kroxigor, because the Kroxigor are super effective. Don't get me wrong. This is excellent. This is really excellent, but it doesn't overtly help the rest of your army work super functional. But it's just really, Really, really good. The other version of the Bastiladon is a Bastiladon with solar engine. Now, this is a missile platform built onto a tank body, and therefore it becomes a very confused hybridization of what it's trying to do. So it's 12 health, 2 up save, but the solar engine, which is its shooting attack, is 18-inch range, and it's 3s, 3s, 3 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 2, damage 3. So pretty reliable, and the rend is also really good. And it's got crit 2 hits. So in a good world, you're going to get really gnarly. But the problem is, right now, it's points, 240 points. Its ability tail swipe that you can do in combat is just going to do some mortal damage up to a maximum of 8. Maybe it's going to do like 2 mortal damage in combat in every combat phase. But even then, probably not. And it's still got the same combat attack, but it doesn't have shoot in combat, which means you can lock this up, and then it could be a tank locked up and most of its output is lost. So this is another piece that you would have to protect in your army, and its output arguably is nowhere near as good for the 240 points you're going to spend as several of your hammer units like Kroxigor or your utility pieces. So I think we're going to put this in ineffective because it's a confused piece. It neither is a good artillery piece nor is it a good combat piece, and being in combat negates 1, and being outside of combat negates what it should be doing, which is sitting on an objective, which is control 5. So we're going to drop that into ineffective. Next up is a unit that I was going to be pretty dismissive of, the Engine of the Gods, with 14 health and a 4 up save, but I have been convinced at least there's an opportunity cost here because it only costs 180 points for this support monster. So 180 points, pretty cheap for 14 health on a 4 up save. And if it gets in combat, then it's got the ability on a 2+ to pick a unit that charged it and not only do some mortal damage, but also give itself +1 save, which is pretty supportive. So maybe it's going to be very survivable, which is nice. It's in combat, it does like very little. 6 attacks, damage 2, but hitting on 4s. On the charge, it's going to get +1 damage, and then obviously Skinks do nothing. But the real reason you're going to bring the Engine of the Gods, if you bring the Engine of the Gods in your hero phase, is because you've got the ability to use the Cosmic Engine. Now, what you're able to do is you're able to not roll on the table, which you've got, and instead save a power token, and then later on add that power token to your dice roll. But if you don't want to do that and you want to keep just absolutely nailing the roll, then every turn you roll a die, you pick 3 friendly units wholly within 12 inches. No, they're all, yes, wholly within 12 inches. And then you roll a dice and then you consult the table. Now, if you bang a big 6 or a 5 if you've got a power token or a 4 if you've got a power token, then up to 3 friendly Seraphon units wholly within 12 inches have strike first for the rest of the turn. And seeing as your win con seems to be based around doing some big damage with either Kroxigor or Aggradons or something, it's not a bad choice. Strike first is good. Multiple units striking first, crazy. That's good. Because when you roll the 6, you're getting 3 units. But you are going to have to fight in a pretty cohesive formation. With Starlight Summons, the other ability, on a 5+, you can pick 3 friendly Seraphon units wholly within 12 inches and return 1 slain model to each unit. That's also not bad if every hero phase you just roll a dice. If you spike a 4, then potentially you're going to put a Kroxigor back into each Kroxigor unit you've got, or an Aggradon into each Aggradon unit, which is pretty nice as well. And then on a 3+, which is much more likely to happen, you can heal D3 to every friendly Seraphon unit, including itself, within 12 inches as well, which is also excellent. So it's pretty good, although situational, and is reducing down and is coming out of the, do you just want to have another unit of 3 Kroxigors, as an example? It's not quite the same. It's really cheap. It's 180 points. Control value 5, can sit on an objective, could do a battle tactic as well because it's in the support role. The wholly within 12 inches makes it difficult to use, but I'm definitely going to put it into the fine category, and it definitely could build, you could build some really interesting lists trying to make that thing happen, which I think is very cool. So yeah, very interesting. Not necessarily super effective, but definitely could be if you bang the right dice rolls. Next up, we're going to look at another hammer unit, the Aggradon Lancers. So unit 3, reinforceable up to unit 6, 5 health, so not quite as much health as Kroxigor, 4 up save, control value 2, but obviously a unit 6 can be control value like, I don't know, 12 or whatever it is. Now, in combat, just a bucket of attacks, right? So 3 attacks for the Rider, which are 3s and 3s, rend 1, bit yikesy, but it does go to rend 2 against a monster, damage 1, unless it's charged, in which case it's damage 2. So a reinforceable unit 6 is 20. And then the actual dinosaur it's riding, dinosaurs, is 3 attacks. So it's going to be, again, 18 for a grand total of a unit of 6 having something mental like 38 attacks, 39 attacks with the champ. No, 38 attacks, damage 2. That's a lot of attacks. Okay, absolutely huge volume of attacks. They're also faster than the Kroxis, so they move 10. So there's that conversation. Do you want a fast unit? Maybe have one of each, a little bit of A, a little bit of B. And they've also got this primal range ability where at the end of any turn, if they've maintained in combat, they get a rage token. As long as they stay in combat, they can get up to having a maximum of 3 rage tokens. And for each rage token, you get to add +1 to the attacks characteristic of this unit's companion weapons, which sadly do hit on 4s. There's three attacks hitting on 4s. But all-out attack will work on a companion weapon, so you could have these be down to 3s. So that's potentially 6 attacks per Aggradon, which is wild for, what is that, 36 attacks at damage 2 from just the mounts themselves. But you've got to be like in combat. If you're in combat, you're probably losing some Aggradons, but yeah, these are just as effective, just slightly different and fit in a slightly different space and role as the Kroxigor, and they're just very, very good. They're definitely scary, but they're not in the same category as some of the major hitters like Varangard, Chosen, not quite in that same tier, but high health, good, okay armor save, and a lot of attacks makes them very good. Our next unit there's 2 Skinks, the Hunters of Huanchi with Starstone Bowlers and the Hunters of Huanchi with Dart Pipes. So they basically do the same thing in that they are 5 models with a 6-up save and a 5-up ward, but they can go into deep strike. This is super important. So in the deployment phase, you can put them in ambush, and in your movement phase, you can bring them on the board, anywhere on the board more than 9 inches from the enemy. Now, if you've got the Dart Pipes, then you've got the ability to do Star Venom, which using their Dart Pipes, which is 2 attacks each, with crit auto wound. Pick an enemy unit that had a damage points allocated to it this turn by the Dart Pipe. Then roll a dice on a 2+, you subtract 1 from the wound rolls for the target's combat attacks for the rest of the turn. Now that's really nice, especially if what you're trying to do is play more of a mid-board fighting game. We already know that we've got like quite a lot of health on our big hammer units, but we don't necessarily have the best armor save. 4-up is fine, but what we really want to do is make it so our enemy doesn't do as much damage. So -1 to wound is a really effective stat, which is super nice. And this is in any shooting phase. So if we do use a command ability to shoot in the opponent's turn, pretty nice. They also move pretty fast, 8 inches, and shoot 10. So even when you deep strike, you're still going to, that turn, be able to do it 9 inches away. As long as they don't redeploy, make them -1 to wound. So if you're going to charge in, -1 to wound. Now, these are 80 points. Now, the other version, the Starstone Bowlers, can also go into deep strike. They still shoot 10 inches as well. They got 1 shot each. But their special ability is, in any shooting phase, when they use the Starstone Bowlers, you roll a dice on a 3-up until the start of next turn. You subtract 1 from the number of dice rolled, making a charge roll for the targets to a minimum of 1. This is in any shooting phase, and it's not any shooting phase per army. So if you did have 2 units of these, which is what I would suggest, then this means that you could try to shoot unit twice and it's just pick an enemy unit that was targeted. The other unit did damage points. This is just pick an enemy unit that was targeted. Roll a dice on a 3+. The 3+ is the dodgy bit, but you've got multiple attempts to do it. Now, making our opponent only be able to charge on a d6 is crazy good. But more importantly than anything else, this is 100 points or 200 points if you take 2 to deep strike and do battle tactics. You're playing in order, and currently in 2025, with 4 months left on this GHB, this opens up a ton of different battle tactics. This gives you board edges if you wait a turn. This gives you grabbing terrain from your opponent. This gives you table quarters. This also gives you, it gives you at least those 3 from the start. And it's only going to cost you 100 points. So it's either going to be controlling the entire game state, and, in the worst situation, just setting them up as a screen in front of your army if you need to. It's controlling the game state. It's scoring your battle points as well. It's only going to cost you 100 to 200 points. So it's just an absolute no-brainer. And up there goes the Starstone Bowlers. They go straight into most effective. And just because I'm a hater, I'm putting in the other Skinkos, which are just as effective, really. But they're going to go into effective. But the Starstone Bowler ones, I just don't understand why every single Seraphon list doesn't have 2 units. The -1 to wound, I understand, is really effective. And maybe over time, or maybe that's like a thing to learn as well. But either way, your list should always have 2 units of those Hunters of Huanchi. In fact, I'll just put them both up there, just because that's fair. You should have 2 units of these. Whichever one you want to take, they should be in your list. Otherwise, you're not trying to win the game. Another version of this, hey, listen, there's a guy in the chat called Dom, one of the best Warhammer players in the country, if not the world. He's also one of the nicest people ever. He just came into the chat with, I think he's currently top 10 in the world. And he was just like, hey, by the way, Rob, I take Kroak and I take 20 units of 5. Guess what? You absolutely can do that in Age of Sigmar. And ask yourself that question, what does that look like on the tabletop, a Skink Cloud? You get an AoE mortal damage from Kroak. You can't charge anything because there's Skinks in the way everywhere. They're always constantly shooting you and make you only charge on a D6, which means even if you get within 3 inches of the enemy, you're only going to make a successful charge on the roll of a 4+, okay? Because you've got to go over 3 inches to make the charge. And you just shut down the whole enemy all the time, constantly. It's not necessarily sensible, but it's a play you can do. And that's how powerful and effective that unit is. Okay, next unit are Saurus Guard. Saurus Guard is 5 models, reinforceable up to unit of 10 models, and they're only 120 points. They're super, super cheap. So for 5 models, you're going to get yourself 10 health with a 3-up save. But if you're near a Slann, keyword Slann, so it's going to be Kroak or a Slann, then you're going to get a 5-up ward save on that unit. So you can make a Slann have a 5-up ward save, and this unit will gain a 5-up ward save. Obviously, Kroak's already got a 4-up ward save. Okay, so, and then in combat, 3 attacks. So you're either going to be doing 16 attacks, thanks to the champ, or reinforceable up to a unit of 31 attacks. If you've got a unit of 10, which are 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1. So the output's okay, but could be super consistent. Thinking about having a Slann or Kroak, you're probably going to be taking Morbid Conjuration, which means you've got Purple Sun. The reason you're probably taking those is because you've got lots of casts that you can do. You can cast 3 with a Slann, 3 with Kroak, so drop down a Purple Sun, and immediately these Saurus Guard potentially are going to be Rend 2. Other ways of getting Rend we're going to talk about with Spawn of Chotec in the future, so Rend 3. It's pretty scary for an amount of output that you can do. It's a lot of attacks that just keep rolling, and pretty survivable with that 5-up ward save, and super cheap. I think that's the thing to talk about. A reinforced unit of 10 of these, which is 20 health with a 3-up save, 5-up ward save, is only 240 points. Go find me a 240 point unit that's 20 health with a 3-up, 4-up. That doesn't 3-up, 5-up. It doesn't include the fact that you can have asterisms to ignore rend as well, which you can have. So you can have an absolutely just an incredibly tough unit to get rid of. I'm just being told that potentially the points have updated, so it's 140, so it's 280. That's still cheap. It's still very, very cheap. Find me a 280 point unit that's got that as well. Either way. And then I guess if you were running a Slann, this unit comes back. So Saurus Guard are really good. They make your Slann better. They're cheap and they're effective. So they probably are going to go into effective. If you're running a Slann, I feel like you're going to run the Saurus Guard. But maybe if you're running Kroak, maybe you don't, because you don't get quite as much out of it. But I guess ultimately it's a really solid frontline combat block that you could also have that you're going to push forward with Kroak, or maybe you could have multiple units of these and you plan on just having a pretty aggressive frontline made out of very tough units. I don't necessarily think they've got quite the health pool because it's a unit of 5 reinforceable to 10, when really you'd like it to be 10-20. But maybe if it was 10-20, it'd be crazy good. So yeah, they're definitely in the effective category for sure. Let's go look at the next unit. Just a second update to my first update. It could well be 120 for those. Both the app, list bot, and also the Warhammer community site say the 120. So even better. Next up, we look at Saurus Warriors. Saurus Warriors are 160 points for 10 models with 2 health, 4-up save, reinforceable obviously up to 20. This does mean that you can have a 40 health unit with a 4-up save if every model in that unit, which getting 20 models on an objective is tough, but if each model on that unit is contesting an objective, then you're going to get +1 to your save, which obviously, ignoring Rend 1 asterism, is potentially going to be 3-up, ignoring Rend 1 on 40 health. Now, the reason these maybe aren't as prevalent or successful as we're seeing inside the game as things like Chaos Warriors, which kind of are similar, is they do not gain access to the 5-up ward save so easily as Chaos Warriors do. And there are some other examples of units kind of similar, but I don't hate the fact that situationally you can get +1 to your save. Either way, it's a lot of health, and they're not super expensive at 160 points. 2 attacks each, 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1. No real way to buff up the sheer volume of attacks that you can get, which means that they don't also fit in the role of being like kind of frontline bruiser units, and instead they definitely fulfill more of a tank role. But there is an opportunity to get a lot of rend potentially added onto this, and if you get them to go and hold the board, hold an objective, I guess that's kind of what their job is for. They do feel like they pale in comparison to what you're going to get with the Source Guard. So I'm just going to put these guys into fine. They are fine. They're fine. And you take a ton of them, they're fine. A good example of a better version of what Saurus Warriors are going to be, or could be, currently is Ard Boys. Ard Boys have the ability, if you take them in the Army of Renown right now, to have 2 units of 20 with 5-up ward saves next to each other, which is bananas. But Ard Boys don't have Kroak sat behind them doing a ton of mortal damage. So maybe that's the trade-off, but they're fine, and they'll be okay. Our next hero is a Skink starpriest. He's basically perfect because he's exactly average. He's a wizard that costs 100 points. Wizards are super effective because they let you do spells. Also got the ability to give crit auto wounds to a unit if that's what you want to do. He's only got 5 health with a 6-up save. Wizard level 1. Moves 8 inches, but is fine. Basically perfect in every way. You definitely want a wizard. There's another opportunity for a wizard, and it's going to go into the effective section. Next up, we have 2 very interesting units that are quite similar. You've got Raptadon Hunters and Raptadon Chargers. Both of them are 5 models reinforceable to 10 models with 3 health and 5-up save, and very fast. They're Skinks, so with the Skink keyword, and they move 12 inches. So they've got an ability that helps each other out. For the Hunters, if this unit is not in combat, you can pick a friendly Raptadon Charger unit, which is the other unit, that charges turn is within 12 inches. This unit can use a shoot ability as if it were your shooting phase. And his shooting attack is okay. 2 attacks, 4s. Rend 2 though, damage 1. Take a unit of them that's fully reinforced. So it's going to be 21 shots. That's all right. It's not super great, but it's okay. And then for the Raptadon Chargers, you can add 1 to hit rolls for this unit's combat attacks. They target an enemy unit that was targeted by shooting attacks made by friendly Raptadon Hunter units in the same turn. And with 3 attacks from the Riders, this does mean that a unit of 10 is going to do 31 attacks, 4s and 4s, which is pretty yikesy. Rend 1, damage 2 on the charge. But very cheap, 140 points, 280 points for a reinforced unit. That's pretty cheap for what is a ton of attacks. I guess the problem with these are the 5-up save, but they're very fast as well. So I quite like the idea of like 5 of these on a flank. If you, for some reason, haven't decided to get yourself some Hunters of Huanchi, and they can do battle tactics. They could maybe fight some other little flanking units, and that's their job. Pretty fast. Stick them with a command ability to run. They've gone 18 inches up the board. Maybe you could start running into the back of the enemy lines, threatening some of their backline support characters. So I think they're good. They're good. They just don't necessarily fit into some of the other units. And ultimately, you're spending points on these units over spending points on maybe some of your bigger hitters. However, I have seen armies and people play with like vast amounts of Raptadon Chargers. There's a lot of attacks you could potentially do, which is very interesting. So I'm going to put them in fine, which I think is good. Next up, we're going to talk about the Saurus Astrolith Bannerbearer support role unit that's going to have 6 health, 4-up save, and is 130 points. Now, the reason that you're going to bring the Astrolith Bannerbearer is because you're going to be able to give a 6-up ward save to Seraphon infantry units while they're within 12 inches, wholly within 12 inches of this unit. If they've got a 5-up ward save like a Slann, then they're going to 6-up ward save like a Slann, they're going to go to a 5-up ward save, which is pretty good. So the reason you're going to bring this guy is because you're going to get a lot of ward saves. And what you want to do in this situation, in my opinion, is then you want to go down getting a lot of Saurus Warriors, because then you're giving everybody a 6-up ward save, a lot of health, 2 units of 20, Saurus Warriors, which is going to be tough to get inside a wholly within 12-inch bubble, but that is going to get you 80 health with 6-up ward save is going to be pretty effective. But ultimately, never really sees play. Got the ability to add 3 to control score as well, and it's just fine. You would have to go for a very specific build to make him effective for the points that you're spending, especially when those points can be on things that score. Those points can be on something that scores you in-game points, like victory points, like the Hunters. So unfortunately, not quite as good as you would like him to be, but fine. Next up, we got the Saurus Scarvet on Aggradon. Really should have covered this when we covered the Aggradons. It's got 8 health and a 4-up save and moves 10 inches and is okay in combat. But the reason you're going to take this very expensive 190 point like cavalry leader is because of the Alpha Roar ability, which is once per battle in any combat phase. Pick this unit and each friendly Aggradon Lance unit hold within 12 to be the target, and you can add one to the attacks characteristic of the target's companion weapons for the rest of the turn. In addition, place a rage token next to the target to a maximum of 3, which does mean that you're going to basically give 2 attacks to a companion weapon, which is the Aggradons. So it's going to be taking them from 3 to 5 attacks, damage 2, which is genuinely not bad. And if you did have multiple units of Aggradons, like 2 units of 6, then it's a ton of attacks you add into your army on the turn when you're going to fully send. Everything's happening. 2 units of 6 are in. I am giving everyone +2 attacks, and it's going to be wild, which I think is super nice. But it's 190 points. Are you going to have a big go turn like that? You got to ask yourself. And are you going to be able to maintain being wholly within 12 inches and making all those things happen? So I think he's fine for a potentially good buff at the right time. You got to time it right, but it's only once per battle. And after that, you got to really hope that you've killed all the stuff that you need. Otherwise, he's just a guy running around probably trying to score your battle tactics and hold objectives, which is a lot to do for 190 points. Just a quick FYI, the information about the rage token means that you do not add +2 attacks. You only have +1 attack from the Aggradon champion, or whatever it is called. And then the rage token is added, which means as long as you stay in combat, you're going to have 2 rage tokens for the next turn. So making him even worse. I'm going to still keep him in fine, but I'm very tempted to push him into ineffective. Do you know what? I'm doing it. He's in ineffective. Like, just have more Aggradons or units that score your points. It's not that impactful. A once per battle +1 attack. So he's going in the bin. Our next unit we're looking at is the Skink starseer. He's got 6 health, a 4-up save, but he's a level 2 whiz for only the cheap price of 170 points, which is amazing. Now, he's got 2 reasons that you want to bring him. Well, 3. He's a wizard that can cast 2 spells, which means you can cast a lore spell, great. Can cast 2 manifestations, also great. Also got the Skink keyword as well, so got the ability to cast spells through him. 4 reasons. But the 5th reason that you would like to take them is because of the once per battle ability in your hero phase to scry the stars. You roll a number of dice equal to the current battle round number. For each 3+, you pick a friendly Seraphon unit, holding within 18 inches of this unit. That unit has a 5-up ward save until start next turn. Now, you do have to roll really well. However, potentially some Kroxigor with 5-up ward saves only once per battle, but until the start of your next turn is amazing. That you've got the opportunity to do that. That's very cool. And if the game has got a pretty slow tempo, as in you're not engaging really fast early, you've got more opportunity to make more of your army have it, which means if the go turn, as in when everyone starts fighting and clashing, ends up being round 3, you've got the opportunity to have a lot of health on the board with ward saves, which is good, which is actually probably more effective than having recursion from a Slann. However, that's not that maybe not even the best reason to bring him, because like the 8th best reason to bring him, apart from the model, which is the 9th best reason, is the Celestial Doom spell, which is on its war scroll, which is cast on a 7. You pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches, not wholly within, which is amazing. And then ward rolls can be made for the target for the rest of the turn. Brilliant. So this is also going to increase your output into high ward units, which is awesome. So this guy's just an absolute no-brainer. Arguably, like, maybe like number 1 slot. Maybe number 1 slot in the army. In fact, actually, the hunters are the number 1 slot because they just score you points and win you games. But it's very, very good. Very good. And much better than a Slann. Arguably, you take this over a Slann in some cases. Next up is quite a popular choice, actually, but a little bit of an interesting choice, is the Ripperdactyls and Ripperdactyl Chief. So Ripperdactyls themselves is a unit of 3 models reinforceable up to 6, but they're super fast. They move 14 inches. 3 health per model, so 9 or 18, with a 5-up save. But they're only 110 points, which is absolutely bargain cheap. So they're a really nice kind of like a really small skirmishing, fast, punchy unit. If they get hit back, they're definitely going to die. The actual Ripperdactyls themselves have got 3 attacks that hit on 4s, win on 3s, rend 1, damage 1, unless it's charged, which moving 14 inches you should be able to, and it's going to be damage 2. Each time you bring a Ripperdactyl unit or Ripperdactyl Chief, you get an additional Blot Toad like token up to a maximum of 3. And then you pick an enemy unit and you put a Blot Toad next to it. And if you fight a unit with a Blot Toad, then you got Toad Rage, where you add one to the attacks characteristics of these units. Ripperdactyl, tearing jaws while it's in combat with that unit. So you're going to have 4 attacks. So you're either going to have 12 or 24 attacks from the jaws, which are all damage 2, which is really cheap if you do take a reinforced unit of only 220 points. It's a very cheap, really fast movement 14 unit that flies, which means your opponent has to be really cautious of protecting it. If you do take the Ripperdactyl Chief, you've got the ability once per battle in any combat phase to add one to the attack characteristic of the War Spears, which is not the same as the jaws, and the War Spears are pretty garbo. But you get the Block Toad and you get to reinforce it as well. But it's also super cheap for 130 points, so great for doing battle tactics. And arguably, the Hunters are much more difficult to use, but you can see the Ripperdactyls being in the role as as what the Hunters do as well. So I would say that they're probably in the effective range, with the Rippers being good and the Ripperdactyl Chief just probably going into like fine, to be honest. And there's another little Ripperdactyl unit as well, which we'll put up there. It's a unit of 2, which is going to put down there. So yeah, Ripperdactyls are very effective, but they're not like, I don't know. I'm going to put them in fine, actually, because I don't think they necessarily take the place of other units, but they're so cheap and they're so fast. The reason they're good is because of the price, though, for sure. Next up, the unit we're going to talk about is the Spawner Chotec. And my hot take is that this is pretty good, actually. It's got 8 health, 5 up save, control score of 1. Now, it's got 2 shooting profiles because it's a missile unit, really. That's either 16 inches, which is effectively 21 inches with its move, or 10 inches, which is slightly different, which is Stream of Fire, which is pretty rubbish, which is 5 attacks, 2s and 3s, Rend 1, Rend 2 against infantry, damage 1. It's also okay in combat with 3 attacks, Rend 2, damage 3. But the Glob of Flame Acid is the reason that I quite like this. 16-inch range, 1 attack if it hits on a 4. And at this point, I'm sure many people in the comments are going to be telling me that I'm an idiot and that hitting on a 4, obviously bad, to throw it out of the bin. But for 120 points, I don't mind the opportunity cost of hitting, wounding on a 2, Rend 2, and it does D3 plus 3 damage, which is okay. Now, you can obviously all-out attack it as well, so it is 3s, but whatever. If you do shoot with the Glob of Flame Acid, then if any damage points are allocated to an enemy unit by those attacks, you can subtract 1 from save rolls for that enemy unit for the rest of the turn. Which means on a turn in which you're fighting a unit, then they're going to be -1 save. Because you're probably going to be taking a Purple Sun, which additionally adds -1 to someone's save, because you are running Seraphon and you've got lots of spell casting. This means now that you potentially, with another spell available, we could be able to Rend 4 on something as silly as just Saurus Warriors. So, listen, people I think are going to disagree with me, but for me, 120 points to take a shot. I much prefer it over like the Kroxigor Captain. Not Kroxigor Captain, the Aggradon Captain is an example. I think it definitely has a place that could work really well and ultimately could be quite effective. You got to roll to hit, though. I guess that's the point. I'm going to put it in effective, and I'm ready for that to be my hot take that people say is garbage. But I'm saying that's up there. For me, 120 points is a cheap one-shot potential. I guess it's like doing it's effectively a 4-up to -1 save to a unit in 16 inches. Not a bad choice, especially for the high armor save meta that we're currently in. Next unit is a Saurus Oldblood. Saurus Oldblood is 110 points for a hero. That once per battle can add 1 to the wound rolls for combat attacks by Saurus infantry units while they're wholly within 12 inches. Incredibly specific buff, and it's only once per battle. And it's got the ability to fight simultaneous with a unit of non-hero Saurus infantry, but doesn't give them a bonus. Like, you might run a Carnosaurus, and I could see a Carnosaurus maybe as a thing with +1 to wound. They already wound on 3, so it's nice to be wound on 2s. But I'm just going to put this down here. Something has to be in there, and this, I don't know, actually, it's ineffective because you've got to take a lot of Saurus. It's wholly within, is once per battle, but it's not nothing, so it's fine, but it's pretty garbage, and you'll never take it. You would take it. Let me be positive for a moment. You take it if you're running a ton of Saurus. I think there's a Saurus build that's like, it's not a good Saurus build, but really fun down the club where it's like 220s of Saurus, a Slann, who's with some Saurus guard as well. Then we've got to get ourselves a Spawner Chotec, and we're just like, we're just a ton of dinosaurs, right? And we got +1 to wound. Let's go. Which is kind of okay, but it's pretty mid. Our next unit is the Saurus Scarvet on Carnosaur. This is definitely going to take the role of a damage dealer in an army. 14 health, 4-up save, control value 5, moves around the board. Based on the numbers, doesn't do any damage. Doesn't have any bonuses that particularly help the rest of your army out. a tragedy ever since it was released. It's absolutely garbage. It's going to least effective. Next up, we have another damage dealing unit in the Saurus Oldblood on Carnosaur. It's got like 5 attacks, damage 2 from the rider, which is damage 3 on the charge, with 3 attacks from the massive jaws, which is damage 3, and another 4 attacks, which is damage 3, but all of those hit on 4s. But this whole package is 290 points with a situational ability to get strike first only against damaged enemy monsters, and the ability to add +1 to charge rolls for Saurus units holding within 18 on a turn when it charged. But as a frontline melee character for 290 points, it really doesn't bring home what I want, especially when there are better damage dealers for less points. And you've already got good heroes that bring more support to your army, like the starseer, Slann, or Kroak, as an example. So also going to go in least effective. Next unit is the Skink Oracle on Troglodon. It's got 14 health and a 4-up save, control value 5, and it's a monster just like the Carnosaurs. But unlike the Carnosaurs, it really adds to your army. It's got an okay combat profile, nowhere near as good as a Carnosaur. Not that that had a good profile either. But it's also a level 1 wizard, so you can immediately shave 100 points off its 240 point cost. So for the extra 140 points, you're getting 14 health, 4-up save, the ability to move 10 inches. In the combat phase, you've got the ability to pick 3 enemy units in combat with this unit, roll a dice for each target on a 3+. You subtract 1 from hit roll to the target's attacks for the rest of the turn. So -1 to hit to everyone feels really nice. As a combo. You can also heal D3 to this unit at the end of any turn, and you can also do that while it's in combat. But it's a Skink wizard that's also able to go a little bit further out into the enemy territory with control value 5. You can also cast a spell through if you were trying to do that, which is nice, especially for the Kroak spell that you could do through it, which is interesting. So, I mean, I think 240 points is a little expensive, 180 points, and I'd really see play with this. But I think it goes into the fine category that potentially you're going to see play because it has utility over what other units, especially the Carnosaurs, do. Our next unit is a unit of Skinks. They're unit of 10 models. They've got 1 health with a 6-up save. They have javelins and bones and bolt spitters, which is 2 shots, but it's 4s of 4s, no rend damage 1. But they're a unit of 10 reinforced by a unit of 20. So you could have potentially 40 shots that don't do anything, but you'd roll a lot of dice, which would be very fun. They do have an ability called Swift and Nimble, where this unit uses the redeploy command when determining the distance. You can roll 2 dice and pick 1 of the results. So you got a better chance of a much further redeploy, which is kind of nice because they fit into the role of a unit role, which many people in Age of Sigmar 4 won't realize exists, called the screen. This used to be something that a lot of people in Age of Sigmar used to make it so your opponent was blocked up by charges. And 80 points is a pretty good price for a screen, to be honest. 10 models as a screen, pretty nice. So you could just redeploy away even further, all good stuff. But we are probably past the stage where people like taking screens in their armies, especially a screen that could come back from the dead if you'd like to run it near a Slann. But I'm going to put them in effective. I mean, 10 models as a screen? That's got to be a thing. I guess you also could take the other hunters. It's a 5-person screen that also does something. We'll put them in ineffective. They don't do anything apart from being bodies, and the other units do stuff. Okay, but if screens ever make a comeback, we're back, baby. Terrawings, more like Terra Bull. Terrawings is a unit of 3 models. Each model's got 2 health with a 5-up save. They move 12 inches. They only cost 70 points for that unit, which is pretty nice. They cannot be reinforced. They're very cheap, 70 points for 3 models, which maybe could make the place of a screen. They're not great for holding an objective because they've got the beast keyword, meaning they can only count as a control score of 1. They're terrible in combat, but they have an ability in your shooting phase. If you pick an enemy within 10 inches, you roll D3, the roll exceeds the target's command characteristic, target cannot use commands for the rest of the turn, which is kind of an okay ability. Not a great ability, but kind of an okay ability. Shut down an all-out defense, shut down a redeploy, could be okay, depending on the unit. However, in that 70-point roll, you've got much better units like the Hunters of Huanchi, but they move 12 inches, so they're pretty good for battle tactics on that front as well. So they're kind of interesting. So I'm not going to say they're garbage because they're so cheap. We're just going to put them in ineffective and maybe even put them in fine and just be like, they're fine. They're okay. Is that fair to the other units in there? Yeah, that's fair. No, I'm going to put them in ineffective compared to other stuff in the book. I'd just like to be clear. Obviously, you've got to rate this army based on the book itself, right? So I would say Terrawings in some armies would be something people would really want for 70 points. Like, there's definitely armies that are like, I'd love that unit for 70 points in my army. But for 10 more points, I'm getting the Hunters with the Dart Pipes, which is -1 to wound. They've got the Deep Strike mechanic. For additional 30 points, they've got the Bowlers, as an example. Or even for 10 more points, they've got 10 Skinks as a screen. So I think inside this book that there's just better options to do other stuff with, but you could maybe see people play with them. Our next unit is the Stegadon. It's got 14 health and a 4-up save, but it definitely has no support role features, and so only really is a damage dealer. And as a damage dealer, it doesn't have the health characteristic or damage output of other damage dealers that you would spend 220 points on. And so it just unfortunately goes in the least effective category. Our next unit is the Stegadon Chief, who's a hero Stegadon with 14 health, 4-up save, control value 5, a little bit slow at move 8 for fast monster sort of units. His damage output is unfortunately a little bit lackluster, but it's also got a bow shot, which is 3 shots that do damage to it, 18 inches, which is nice for some additional chip damage along with Kroak if you're going along that route. Cheap cost, 200 points for a hero. I personally, and it's got the skink coordination for any non-monster skink unit uses redeploy. Well, it's older than 18 inches this unit, no command points are spent, which is a nice way of saving it. But I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say I just don't know why I would take it. Like, everything else is better in that, there's better damage dealers, there's better support units. It doesn't bring a support that I want or need. I'm not interested at all. It's got the Skink keyword, which could help buff my warp spawn, which I love, as we talked about earlier. But I think probably I would prefer to use the Hunters. I mean, I can get 2 units of Hunters for the Skink Chief, which is a no-brainer to me. That's all the battle tactics I need and shutting down enemy charges versus a pudding. And I don't want a pudding. So, I mean, I like pudding. As you can tell, I'm quite chunky. I do love a pudding, but not this pudding. Thank you very much. A quick clarification, you can't buff the warp spawned with it. So I might even put it lower than least. No, I won't. It's listen, the one thing the Skink Chief on Stegadon has is it's not a carnosaur. That's its saving grace. Our next unit is the Terradon Riders. Terradon Riders, unit of 3 or a unit of 6. They move 14 inches, which is fast, which is exactly what we want. They've got 3 health with a 5-up save, so they're not very survivable. And their damage output is pretty garbage, with the Raptadon Claws just having 3 attacks, 4s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1. Now, the reason that you really want this unit is -1 to be shot from hit rolls, thanks to attack on high, from shooting attacks, which is fine. -1 to shooting attacks, good. Happy with that. But the reason you want is deadly cargo. What you do is if you move across an enemy unit in your movement phase, you roll a dice for each model in this unit. Pick an enemy unit that this unit passed across this phase. Roll a dice for each model in this unit and add 2. So you only need to have moved over with 1 model. And add 2 to each roll if this unit is within the combat ranges of any friendly Terradon Chiefs, which is another unit you could take. For each 5+, you can inflict a mortal damage. For any damage points allocated this ability, the target does not have the fly and cannot use run commands. Now, they're only 90 points for 3, so reinforceable to unit 6 is only 180 points. And you can do this with multiple units of Terradons. Now, are you going to be able to move over? You need to be able to move enough that you can then also get out of combat range, so 3 inches away. And then if you get a unit of 6 and you're near a Terradon Chief, you're going to roll 6 dice on 3-ups. You're going to do mortal damage. So you're probably going to do 4, which is not very good, I know. But if you took 10 units of Terradons and moved them across stuff, that could be 40 mortal damage, which is crazy because they're super, super, super cheap. These are also nice, potentially, if you wanted to run it this way, is to maybe have it over behind the lines of a castle wall, like some Saurus Warriors or some Saurus Guard or some Bastiladons, and just have them constantly flying over and add to the mortal chip damage that maybe you're doing from Kroak or you're doing from your astrolith, not your astrolith banner, your terrain piece. Now, I don't think they're amazing, and it's really hard to manage on the tabletop, but I'm going to put the Terradon Riders as fine with the scope of them doing some absolutely brilliant stuff. So I really like these, and I think you could do some fun stuff. And similar with the Terradon Chief, you do need the Terradon Chief to make it work, and he's 130 points. He's also got the ability to drop some stuff. So that is going to add to the cost and making the combo happen. But it's very fun. I'm going to put the Terradon Chief in here so they can combo together. But yeah, very fast, very cool, very fun. Our last unit is also that unit of 2, because you can take 2 for some reason. So that's it for the Seraphon tier list. These other 2 units are legends. So let me know what you think. I think ultimately, when you start to break down this army, it's got some really big hammers that are very obvious, like the Kroxigor and also the Aggradons, but it's got loads of really functional support pieces in the Skink starseer, the Hunters of Huanchi, the Bastiladon. It's got some nice combat pieces that do a little bit of a different job in either the Saurus Guard, Saurus Warriors, or even the Raptadon Chargers. It's got some fun monsters. You've got a recursion build you can play. You've got access to lots of manifestations and lots of mortal damage. So I think it's a great vibe. It's also an army that can get really silly. Maximum Hunters of Huanchi, maximum Terradons. You can start a bit not maximum carnosaurs, get out. But you can do some really interesting stuff here. I even like the Engine of the Gods play. Sit them behind some units, bring some models back. You could have a pretty fun time with this army. Most of the things you can do are fairly reliable. You've got cheap units and expensive units. So you can really min-max to your heart's desire. And it's dinosaurs riding dinosaurs. So I'm just going to say that this is ace. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you to the Twitch chat who've been hanging out with me while we make this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this army and how you feel about the tier list. But it's been really fun to do. More tier lists in the future. And obviously, if you have enjoyed this, you can go back and watch the Battle Pack review, where most of this stuff is stuff that I've covered as well in the Battle Pack review. And most of it stays about the same. So yeah, really fun. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.